Eleanor Mercer's knees slammed into the wooden platform, the heat of the sun biting into her skin. Her hands trembled, a desperate grasping motion, but her water canteen had already slipped from her fingers, rolling away into the dust. She didn't even try to reach for it. She couldn't. The Montana sun had stolen everything from her: her strength, her will, her hope. The family who had promised her work had vanished 3 days ago, leaving nothing but a note, cold and final. Circumstances changed. Find your own way back. She had no family left. No money. No water. Nothing. Only an empty canteen, a heart full of regret, and the endless, merciless sun above her. Her head swam. The heat burned through her, searing her lips and skin. She could barely lift her arms anymore. She had collapsed, unable to go another step, too far from the town to hope for help. Her thoughts scattered. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and clear. "Ellie, you're too stubborn for your own good. It'll save you or kill you, but if it kills you, that's on you." Today it might kill her. "Please," she whispered, but no sound left her cracked lips. She barely had the strength to think it. "Please, someone, anyone." But there was no answer. The sound of her breaths, shallow and ragged, was all she heard. And the endless sun, relentless as ever. The station master, a tall man with a bored look, stepped over her like she was a sack of grain. "Ma'am, I told you already. No money, no water." That's the rule. His boots stopped inches from her face. She tried to raise her head, but it wouldn't move. The air was too thick, the heat too heavy. He didn't seem to care. Her fingers scraped against the wooden planks beneath her, her hands shaking as she tried to push herself up. She managed to get her arm under her body, but the effort was too much. Her arm buckled, and her cheek pressed against the boards, burning hot against her skin. "Please," she rasped, voice cracking. "I'm a nurse. I can work." "Please." The man laughed, a dry, ugly sound. "Lady, you can barely breathe. The Hendersons left you high and dry. That ain't my problem." Quote. Her fingers barely moved, the words she wanted to say trapped behind parched lips. She had nothing left to offer, and yet still, she whispered the same prayer she had prayed for days. "Please, let someone help me. Let someone care." The man stepped away. "Your problem now." His footsteps faded into the station building, leaving her to the silence. The door slammed shut behind him. It wasn't long before the blackness crept in. It started at the edges of her vision, creeping in like a storm cloud, swallowing her sight, her breath. Her body felt heavy, and all she wanted was rest. She could almost feel her mother's arms around her, holding her tight, telling her it would be okay. But there was no one. She thought of Philadelphia, of the family she had left behind back east, of the life she'd left to come to this wild, empty place. She thought of the letter from the Hendersons, how their promises had seemed like salvation. But now, those promises were ashes, and she was alone. The darkness became the only thing that seemed real. And it wasn't enough. Then, from far away, a voice cut through the haze, a man's voice, rough and surprised. "Hell," he muttered. "What's this?" Quote. Her mind stirred, but her body refused to respond. She heard hooves scraping against the platform, felt a shift in the air as someone dismounted. Through the fog of heat and pain, a figure appeared, looming over her. She couldn't make out his face, but the voice was clear enough. "Ma'am." No response. The stranger's hand rested on her shoulder. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She couldn't answer. The heat, the exhaustion, the despair, they all made it too hard to hold on to anything. But she felt him move, felt his presence beside her, and in the strange quiet that followed, she realized he hadn't walked away. Another voice called out, "Jennings, this woman, she's dying out here." The man crouched next to her, his fingers gentle on her wrist. His touch was firm, purposeful. "Ma'am, don't you worry. We'll get you some water, get you out of here. Just stay with me." She barely registered his words, only the cool relief of his touch, the promise that he wasn't leaving her alone. Her eyes fluttered open, just enough to see a figure leaning over her. A man. A rancher from the look of him. She couldn't hold on to the thought long enough to form it into a question. She could only cling to the last thread of her consciousness as his voice, steady and calming, filled the space. "Hang on. I won't let you die here," he muttered, like a promise. The man's voice was the first thing she could hold on to in what felt like forever. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming, but she wasn't alone anymore. He was there. That was all that mattered. Someone cared. But who was he? Sam Hollister stared down at the woman lying on the platform. He hadn't come to town for trouble. He just needed feed and fencing wire for his ranch. But there she was, a woman barely clinging to life, face down in the dirt. His horse stomped nervously at the heat. Sam squinted against the bright Montana sun, trying to make out any signs of life. Her back rose and fell with shallow, uneven breaths. That was something, at least. He pulled his horse to a stop and swung down from the saddle. He didn't come to help anyone, but there she was. And damn if he couldn't do something. The station master was inside, ignoring the whole scene, and Sam didn't have time to wait for him to make a move. He stepped onto the platform, the boards hot beneath his boots. The woman was young, maybe mid-20s, dressed in a soaked, dusty dress, her brown hair sticking to her forehead. A small carpet bag sat beside her, and her water canteen was bone dry, lying just inches away. "Ma'am," Sam said, kneeling beside her, voice low and careful. "Can you hear me?" Quote. She didn't respond. Her eyelids fluttered, her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Sam cursed under his breath. She couldn't be this close to dying. Not out here, not on his watch. He reached over and gently shook her shoulder. "Ma'am, wake up. You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Her face was pale, almost ghostly against the wood, her lips cracked, stained from the heat. Sam pressed his hand to her forehead. Hot, too hot. He needed to get her to water fast. He looked up at the station building. Jennings, the station master, was behind the desk, sitting with his feet up, completely oblivious. Sam's jaw tightened. He'd been in this town long enough to know how things went, but this wasn't right. He stood up and crossed to the station door, shoved it open with one strong push. The door slammed against the wall, and Jennings jumped back in his chair, wide-eyed. "What the hell are you doing?" Jennings demanded, looking up with irritation. "Woman's dying on your platform, Jennings. And you're sitting in here, waiting for the next train like you don't see her." Jennings leaned back in his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "That ain't my problem. She ain't got money. No ticket. Henderson's left her. Not my fault." Sam felt the old anger stir in his gut. She's got no money. She's got no ticket. You don't turn your back on a person like that. Jennings smirked, an ugly, dismissive look in his eyes. "It's Montana. Ain't nobody gonna help her if she can't help herself." Sam's blood ran cold. He was tired of people turning away when it didn't fit their damn rules. But this time, he wasn't going to walk away. Without a word, Sam turned, heading back to the woman. He knelt beside her again, taking a deep breath as he brushed the sweat-soaked strands of hair from her face. Her green eyes fluttered, but still, she didn't speak. "You're gonna be all right," he murmured, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it. She tried to speak, a whisper coming from her cracked lips. Who are you?" His heart skipped a beat. She was talking. That was good. Sam gently cradled her head, lifting her a little so she could drink. He held a damp bandana to her lips, letting her suck in small sips. She drank greedily, her hands weakly gripping his sleeve. "Sam!" "Sam Hollister," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Her eyelids fluttered again, her gaze unfocused. "Eleanor Mercer." "All right, Eleanor," Sam said softly, as he pulled her up into a sitting position, supporting her back. "Stay with me now. We're going to get you out of here." Quote. She blinked up at him, confused and weak. Her hand still clung to his sleeve as if it was the only thing keeping her grounded. "Where?" she started, her voice barely a whisper. "Where am I?" "Bitterroot Valley," Sam answered, trying to keep his voice calm. I'm gonna get you to my ranch. It's not far. You'll be safe there." Her eyes widened slightly, fear creeping into them. I can't impose on you. You don't." "Don't worry about that," Sam interrupted, shaking his head. "You need help. I'm giving it." "Ain't no question about it." Eleanor's lips parted, but no words came out. Her fingers still clung weakly to his sleeve, her breath shallow. Sam glanced at the water trough on the edge of the platform, the cool, clear water sparkling under the harsh sun. "Can you move?" he asked gently, looking at her again. She nodded weakly, but her body refused to follow through. Sam's gaze flicked over to the station, where Jennings was still sitting, now with a bored expression, as if he had no idea what was really happening just a few feet away. With a sigh, Sam gently gathered Eleanor in his arms, cradling her like she weighed nothing. The heat was unbearable, but she had to get out of the sun. He'd carry her if he had to. He crossed back to his wagon, lifting her into the seat carefully, securing her there. The heat from the ground rose through his boots as he climbed into the wagon beside her, giving the horses a gentle tug on the reins. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice shaky but stronger now. "To my ranch. I'll keep you safe. Rest for now." Eleanor nodded weakly, her eyelids fluttering as she drifted in and out of consciousness. Sam kept his eyes on the road ahead, his thoughts racing. He didn't know what had happened to her or why she'd been left to die alone on that platform, but he was certain of one thing. He wasn't letting her go, and no one would stop him. The ride to Sam's ranch was long and filled with dust. Sam kept his gaze steady on the road ahead, though he couldn't stop glancing at the woman beside him. Eleanor, her name stuck in his mind like a whisper he couldn't shake. She was still unconscious, her head resting against the edge of the wagon as he tried to make the journey as smooth as possible. She was a stranger to him, but that didn't matter. No one should be left like she was, stranded and dying on a platform, abandoned by those who'd promised to care for her. He had no idea what had happened to her, but that didn't matter either. She was here now, and he wasn't going to let her slip away. The horses plodded along, their hooves beating a steady rhythm against the dry earth. The sun hung low in the sky, its heat still harsh, but the air had a strange stillness about it, as if it too were waiting for something to break. Sam had seen days like this before, days when the land felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to come. He felt the weight of the silence between them. Eleanor's soft breaths, the sound of the wagon creaking beneath him, the distant calls of birds. Everything was muted. He wasn't used to being around someone like her. Not anymore. Sam hadn't been close to a woman in 2 years, not since Margaret had left him. The memory of her still stung, but he didn't dwell on it now. He couldn't afford to. The ranch needed him, the land needed him, and he had his work to do. But Eleanor, as weak and vulnerable as she was, had made him think about things he hadn't allowed himself to think about in a long time. Trust, kindness, maybe even hope. The wagon rumbled on for another hour before he finally spotted the silhouette of his ranch in the distance, the outline of the barn and house barely visible through the haze of the heat. His ranch wasn't much to look at, an old farmhouse with peeling paint, a barn that had seen better days, and a few scattered outbuildings. It wasn't a place that inspired admiration, but it was his, and it was where he'd built a life after Margaret had taken everything and walked away. It was all he had left. He pulled the wagon up to the porch and stopped. Eleanor hadn't stirred, her face still pale and sweaty, her body limp as he gently lifted her down from the wagon. He could feel her weight against him, the fragility of her body, and it made something tighten in his chest. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice rough. "We're here!" Her eyes fluttered open, blurry at first, but her green gaze locked onto him. She blinked a few times, as if she were still unsure whether she was dreaming or not. What happened?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're at my ranch. You were passed out on the platform. I got you out of there." She blinked again, trying to focus. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Sam said, his tone soft but firm. "Just rest. We'll get you inside. Get you some water." Eleanor didn't resist as he lifted her again, this time into his arms. Her body was so light, too light for someone who'd been abandoned to die. She smelled faintly of sweat and dust, But there was something else, too, something soft and familiar about her. Sam tried to shake off the feeling, but it was hard not to notice how fragile she looked in his arms. Inside, the ranch house was cool compared to the heat outside, but not by much. The air felt thick with the smell of wood and earth, of dust and sweat that had lingered through the long summer months. Sam carried Eleanor to the small guest room at the back of the house, where the bed was simple but clean. He laid her down gently, pulling the covers over her. "Rest," he said. "I'll get you some water." She gave a weak nod, her eyes closing again, and Sam stepped out of the room. He knew she needed time. Time to recover from whatever had driven her to that platform. Time to heal from the heat and the exhaustion that had nearly taken her life. Sam filled a glass of water and took it to her, gently tilting it to her lips. She drank greedily, too thirsty to care how slow it came. When she finally pulled away, she looked at him, her green eyes wide and filled with a quiet gratitude. "You saved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sam's heart tightened in his chest. It wasn't anything special. He'd done what anyone would do. But looking at her now, looking at how vulnerable she was, he couldn't help but feel something stir inside him. "You were dying out there," Sam said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't about to leave you there." She tried to smile, but it was weak, a fleeting curve of her lips. "I don't know what to say. I never imagined. I never thought." Sam sat down on the edge of the bed, his hand resting lightly on hers. He wasn't sure what to say either. He'd never been good with words, especially not with women. But with her, there was something different. "I'm sorry," she said, after a long moment of silence. "I didn't mean to be such a burden." "You're not a burden," Sam replied quietly. "You're just someone who needed help." She nodded, her eyes fluttering shut once more. "Thank you, Sam." He stayed there for a while, watching over her as she drifted back to sleep. She looked so fragile, so lost, as though the world had taken everything from her. And for a moment, he wondered just what had happened to her to bring her to this point. But no answers came. Only silence. It was late by the time he finally stood up and left the room. He went out to the porch, sat down on the rocking chair, and let the cool night air wash over him. The ranch was quiet. The only sounds the creak of the wood beneath him and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. And yet, as Sam stared out into the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something had changed. He didn't know what it was, but he couldn't ignore it. Tomorrow he'd figure it out. For now, though, all he could do was hope that the woman lying in his guest room would wake up, would recover, and would be able to tell him just who she was and why she'd ended up on that platform. Because if her story was anything like his, then she was carrying a burden heavier than he could imagine. And maybe, just maybe, he could help her carry it. The morning came slow, like the sun was stretching itself out over the horizon, reluctant to chase away the shadows. Sam woke early, as he always did, but today was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something in the air, something inside him. He'd carried a woman back to his ranch, a woman who had been left to die alone on a platform. And though she wasn't out of danger yet, there was something about her that lingered in his mind. She'd woken a few times through the night, her body racked with shivers from the fever that had taken hold of her. He'd stayed by her side, making sure she drank water, pressing cool cloths to her skin to keep the heat down. But by morning, she was finally resting soundly, her breathing steady for the first time since he'd found her. Sam stepped outside to gather his thoughts. The day was already shaping up to be a hot one, the air thick with the promise of more heat. He walked to the barn, where the smell of fresh hay and leather greeted him. The cattle were still restless after the long drought, and he needed to check the fences and feed them before the sun climbed too high. His mind kept drifting back to Eleanor, to the look in her eyes when she'd first opened them, to the way her hand had clung to his sleeve, like he was the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. She'd been so fragile, so lost. He hadn't expected to find her out there, not like that, but now that she was here, in his care, something inside him wanted to protect her. Something inside him didn't want to let her go. As he moved through his chores, he kept an eye on the house, making sure the silence wasn't an omen. She'd been through enough, and the last thing she needed was to feel like a burden or an outsider in his home. But Sam knew the ranch wasn't big enough for two people to stay in isolation for long. Eventually, the questions would start, and when they did, Sam wasn't sure how to answer them. He made his way back to the porch, wiping the sweat from his brow, just as the sun began to burn brighter, and there she was. Eleanor stood at the edge of the porch, her back to him, looking out over the land as though it were hers too. Her hair was still damp from the night's fever, but she looked stronger now, more like herself. "Morning," Sam called, his voice rougher than he intended. Eleanor turned slowly, her eyes meeting his. She still looked tired, but there was something different in the way she carried herself today. A quiet strength that Sam hadn't seen before. Her green eyes seemed to hold the weight of something deeper than the heat of the sun or the desperation of the past few days. "Morning," she replied, her voice steady. "I wanted to thank you again for everything, for saving me." Sam waved a hand, brushing it off like it was no big deal. "I didn't do much. Just got you out of the heat. You have done the same for anyone." Her lips curved into a small smile, but it faded quickly. "Still," she said quietly, "I'm grateful. I didn't know what was going to happen to me out there. I didn't think I'd make it." Sam stepped closer, feeling the weight of her words settle between them. "You're here now," he said, trying to keep it simple. "And you'll be all right." She nodded, but there was something in the way she looked at him that made his chest tighten. He wasn't used to this, used to the quiet of the ranch, the solitude. But now, with Eleanor here, the silence felt different. Felt heavy. "Do you remember anything about what happened?" Sam asked, trying to draw her out. He had a feeling that the whole story wasn't as simple as she'd made it sound. The way she'd been abandoned like that, left to die without a second thought. Something wasn't right. Eleanor hesitated, her eyes drifting toward the horizon again. "I remember the Hendersons. They promised me work, a position as a nurse. They even paid for my passage out here. When I arrived, the station agent handed me a note. Told me they were gone, that they had left for San Francisco. No explanation, no apology, just gone." Her voice faltered, and Sam felt his jaw tighten. He'd heard of people being left behind, but he couldn't imagine the kind of betrayal that would make someone abandon another human being in a place like this, especially someone who was supposed to be trusted. "That's cruel," he muttered, his voice a little darker than he meant. Eleanor sighed, the weight of the past few days catching up to her again. "I had no choice but to try and find work, but every door was closed. People wouldn't hire me without local references, and I didn't have any. My money ran out, and I didn't know what else to do. That's when I collapsed." Sam felt the anger rise in him, a deep, simmering heat that he couldn't quite control. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had left her stranded to die, deserved to feel the consequences. But it wasn't his fight. Not yet. "Where were you from before all this?" he asked, trying to steer the conversation away from her abandonment. "Philadelphia," she replied, her voice soft, almost as if she were reluctant to talk about it. "I had a family there, a life, a job. Everything seemed fine until—" She trailed off, and Sam saw the sadness in her eyes. "You've lost a lot," Sam said quietly. "And I'm sorry for that, but I'll tell you this. You don't have to carry it alone." She glanced at him, her green eyes meeting his. She seemed to be weighing his words, as if unsure whether she could trust them, trust him. "I know what it feels like," Sam continued, his voice rough but steady. "To lose everything, to think you've got nothing left but dust. But if you stick around here, I'll make sure you have a place, a purpose." For a moment, there was silence. Eleanor didn't speak, but Sam could see the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. She wasn't as fragile as she seemed. Maybe that's what had drawn him to her, what had made him feel responsible for her. She was strong. She had to be. After a long pause, Eleanor finally spoke. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Sam replied, his voice quiet. "Just stay, at least until you're better." Eleanor nodded, and for the first time she seemed to relax, even if just a little. Sam could see the fear that had been there before. Fear of being a burden, of being turned away, start to fade. It was a small thing, but it meant something. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steady now, though still fragile. Sam smiled, just a little, but it was genuine. "You're welcome. You're part of the ranch now, whether you like it or not." Quote. And in that moment, Sam realized that he wasn't just taking care of a woman who had been left for dead. He was building something he hadn't realized he needed until now. It was a strange feeling, one he wasn't sure how to handle, but it wasn't unpleasant. The silence that had followed Margaret's departure was starting to fade, replaced by the sound of Eleanor's quiet voice, her presence in the house, and the faint warmth that seemed to fill the space between them. It wasn't just his ranch anymore. The next few days passed slowly, like the land itself was holding its breath. Eleanor had begun to regain her strength, though the fever that had ravaged her body still clung to her at night. She was eating more now, and Sam noticed the faint color returning to her cheeks. But despite her progress, something lingered in the air between them, an unspoken tension that neither of them addressed. Each morning, Sam would check on her, making sure she had enough water, food, and rest. And each time, Eleanor would thank him quietly, as if she were still unsure of her place in the house, in his life. She wasn't used to being helped, to being looked after. Sam could see that in the way she hesitated, the way she tried to stand on her own, even when her body wasn't ready for it. The ranch was keeping Sam busy. The drought had made everything harder. His cattle were thin, the land was dry, and every day was a struggle to keep the ranch afloat. Still, he kept his head down and worked, knowing that if he stopped, even for a second, everything might slip through his fingers. Eleanor had started helping where she could. It was small things at first, keeping the kitchen clean, tending to the few chickens they had left, making sure the horses had enough water. Sam was surprised at how quickly she took to it, how natural it seemed for her to move around the house, even with her past so heavy on her shoulders. One evening, after a long day of work, Sam found her standing by the water trough, her hands resting lightly on the edge as she watched the horses drink. Her back was straight, her eyes distant, but there was something in her posture that made him stop. He leaned against the doorframe of the barn, watching her for a moment before speaking. "You're doing better." Eleanor didn't turn around, but her shoulders relaxed. "I feel better. I never thought it would take this long. I thought I'd be back to myself by now." "You were pushed to the edge," Sam said quietly, stepping forward, his boots scraping against the dirt. "It takes time to come back from that." "I've never been this weak before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like it. I don't like depending on anyone." Sam stopped beside her, looking out at the horses, the setting sun casting long shadows over the land. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but also heavy with things left unsaid. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Sam said after a long pause. "You're not here to be some kind of burden. You're here because you need a place to heal. And that's all there is to it." Quote. Eleanor turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him from the corner of her eye. "I know, but it's hard to accept that." He nodded. "I understand. I'm not used to taking help either. But sometimes you just have to let someone take care of you. Let them show you that you're worth it." Eleanor blinked, looking down at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the trough. "I don't know how to let go of control. It's always been up to me." Sam leaned against the trough beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "I don't know if you ever fully let go of it. But you don't have to carry it alone. Not here. Not anymore." She didn't respond, but Sam could feel the shift in her, the way her posture softened, the way the tension in her shoulders eased, just a little. They stood in silence for a while longer, both lost in their own thoughts, the weight of their unspoken words hanging in the air between them. As the days passed, Eleanor continued to recover. She worked alongside Sam on the ranch, learning what she could about ranching life, helping Hector with small tasks around the house. Sam couldn't deny the small spark of hope that was starting to burn in him, the thought that maybe, just maybe, things were starting to turn around. It was on the fourth day after Eleanor had started to regain her strength that the storm hit. The sky darkened quickly, clouds rolling in faster than Sam had anticipated. He had barely enough time to get the cattle into the barn before the wind began to whip around him, sending dust and debris flying through the air. The storm had come on fast, and Sam knew that it wouldn't be a small one. He shouted to Hector, telling him to secure the barn doors and make sure the animals were safe. "Eleanor," he called out, spotting her at the edge of the yard, walking toward the house with the wind blowing her hair into wild tangles. "Get inside! It's coming in fast!" She turned, her face a picture of determination. "I can help with the cattle." "No!" Sam's voice cracked through the chaos. "Get inside! It's too dangerous!" But Eleanor didn't listen. She took a few more steps toward the barn before Sam rushed toward her, grabbing her arm. "You're not helping anyone if you're out here in the middle of this." She jerked her arm out of his grip, looking up at him with a fire in her eyes that he had only seen flashes of before. "I can't sit in that house waiting for someone to tell me what to do." Sam shook his head, his frustration building. "You're not well enough yet. You're pushing yourself too hard." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "I'm not a weakling, Sam. I've been on my own for a long time. I've had to." Sam's heart sank. She didn't know it, but that hurt more than any of the anger she could throw his way. It reminded him too much of Margaret, of her desperate need to prove herself, even when the world around her was falling apart. "I know you're strong, Eleanor," Sam said, his voice low, quiet. "But I'm not going to let you break yourself, trying to prove something. Not to me, not to anyone." Quote, Eleanor's gaze softened, and for a moment they stood there in the middle of the wind, facing each other, neither of them saying a word. Then, in the distance, a crash of thunder broke through the tension, and Eleanor finally relented. "Fine," she said, her voice quieter than before, "but only because you're right. I'll go inside." Sam gave her a small, approving nod, relief flooding him. But as they turned to walk back to the house, he couldn't help but notice that the storm wasn't just on the horizon anymore. It was here, and it was just as dangerous as they had both feared. By the time they reached the house, the rain began to fall, cold and heavy. Sam took Eleanor's arm and pulled her inside, the sound of the storm pounding on the roof like a warning. Eleanor leaned against the door as Sam secured it, the house dimly lit by the glow of a few lanterns. She was breathing heavily, but her expression had softened, her fierce determination now replaced with a quiet acceptance. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice a mix of regret and gratitude, "for everything, for pushing you away when all you've done is help." Sam looked at her, his eyes soft. "No need to apologize. Just promise me you'll take care of yourself too. You don't have to carry it all on your own." Eleanor gave him a small smile, a tired, real one this time. "I'll try." Sam stepped closer, the weight of the storm outside pressing in on them, but for a moment, everything inside was still. He didn't know what was coming next, but he did know one thing. He wasn't going to let her go. The storm raged through the night, the wind howling as rain battered the house and barn. Sam sat in the dimly lit living room, a fire crackling softly in the hearth, but his mind wasn't on the warmth. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to shift, that the calm they'd been holding on to since Eleanor's arrival was only temporary. The world around them was changing, and so was he. Eleanor was asleep in the room at the back of the house, her breathing steady now, the fever that had once gripped her finally broken. She had started to heal, and Sam could see it in the way she moved, the way her shoulders had started to ease from their perpetual tension. But Sam knew her better than that. She hadn't healed fully. She couldn't. Not yet. He'd seen the way she fought against needing help. The way she refused to let anyone see her vulnerability, as though doing so would cost her everything she had left. Sam understood that more than she realized. He'd built walls around himself, too, walls that had kept people at arm's length for years. But now, with Eleanor in his life, those walls felt like a prison. The fire crackled louder as the storm outside grew more intense, the house groaning under the weight of the wind. Sam's eyes moved to the window, where the rain ran in rivers down the glass. Outside, the ranch was lost in shadows, but inside, things were beginning to feel different. He wasn't sure if it was Eleanor's presence that made him feel alive again, or if it was the way she'd forced him to confront his own loneliness. The door creaked open behind him, and Sam turned to see Eleanor standing there in her nightdress, her hair loose around her shoulders. She was still pale from the illness, but there was strength in the way she held herself. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to live again. "You should be resting," Sam said, his voice low but firm. "I'm fine," Eleanor replied, stepping further into the room, her eyes meeting his. "I couldn't sleep. The storm's too loud." Sam nodded, but the way she stood there, her gaze steady and sure, made his chest tighten. She wasn't the same woman he had carried into the house just days ago. She had changed, just as much as he had. In some ways, she was still a mystery to him, still holding back parts of herself he hadn't yet seen. But Sam knew one thing for sure. He cared about her. More than he should, more than he was ready for. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair next to the fire. "I'll get you something to drink." Eleanor hesitated for a moment, but then moved to sit, her body sinking into the chair with a quiet sigh. Sam made his way to the kitchen, pulling out 2 mugs and filling them with hot tea. He wasn't much for sentiment, wasn't good with words or feelings, but he knew how to make someone feel safe. And right now, that was what Eleanor needed. When he returned with the mugs, Eleanor was staring into the fire, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the chair, her eyes far away. She wasn't lost in thought. She was just quiet. The silence between them had become a comfort, but it was still fragile. "I'm glad you're feeling better," Sam said, setting the tea in front of her. Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes still weary but soft. "I'm getting there," she said quietly, "but it's not just about the fever, is it?" Quote. Sam's throat tightened, and he sank down into the chair across from her. He didn't have an answer. Not one that would make sense. Not yet. He couldn't explain what he was feeling, why it felt like he had something to protect now, something he hadn't realized he was missing. "No," he said after a long pause, his voice thick. "It's not just about the fever." Quote. Eleanor's gaze held his for a moment longer, and Sam could see the understanding in her eyes. She wasn't asking for him to explain it. She wasn't asking for anything. She was just waiting, like she had been from the start, for him to figure it out on his own. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, breaking the silence between them, "for everything, for being so difficult, for pushing you away when you've only been kind." Sam's breath caught in his chest, the weight of her words sinking deep into him. He didn't know how to respond. Not with words. Not with anything that would make sense. He stood, walking over to her slowly, the only sound in the room, the crackling fire and the storm outside. "You don't have to apologize," he said gently, his hand brushing her hair back from her face. "I don't need an apology. Just stay with me. Let me help." Eleanor didn't pull away, but her eyes filled with something Sam couldn't name. She nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but enough for Sam to know that she was letting him in, that she trusted him. "I don't know how to be helped," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm trying." "Trying is enough," Sam said, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what this meant, what they meant. But right now, with her sitting here, looking at him like she saw him for who he really was, he didn't care. The storm outside raged on, but inside, in this room, there was a kind of calm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean or easy. But it was real. And for the first time in years, Sam didn't feel so alone. As he sat down beside her, Eleanor leaned into his side, her head resting gently against his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a while. They didn't need to. The storm could rage as much as it wanted outside. Inside, there was peace. The next morning was still, the air heavy with the remnants of the storm. Sam woke early, as he always did, but this time he didn't rush out to tend to the cattle or the barn. He made breakfast for both of them, the quiet hum of the house, the only sound, as Eleanor helped where she could. There was a sense of togetherness now, one that Sam hadn't realized he'd been craving. Eleanor wasn't just a woman he had found abandoned on a platform anymore. She was becoming a part of his world. She was becoming someone he couldn't imagine losing. After breakfast, Sam took her outside, and for the first time since she had arrived, Eleanor helped him check the fences, her fingers working the wire with surprising dexterity. Sam watched her, a small smile tugging at his lips. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming part of this place, part of his life. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she needed. to have a place, to belong. By the time the sun had begun to dip behind the mountains, they stood side by side, looking over the land. Sam could feel the weight of the past few weeks lift from his shoulders, replaced by something new, something full of possibility. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice quiet. Eleanor looked up at him, her green eyes meeting his with a clarity he hadn't seen before. "Neither are you." Quote. And for the first time in a long time, Sam believed it. He wasn't alone, and neither was she.